Hello, the date is February 5th, 2024. The interviewee is Inge Bass. Interviewer Andriette Redman. We're in Marlton, New Jersey, USA. Pause. Hello, the date is February 5th, 2024. The interviewee is Inge Bass. The interviewer is Andriette Redman. We're in Marlton, New Jersey, USA, and the language is English. Hello, Inge. Do you want to tell us your name and your birthday and where you were born?
Inge Bass. I was born August 6, 1931 in Mainz, Germany.
And your parents' names, your father's name?
Robert, and my mother was Irma.
And the last name?
Berger.
And your father was born when?
In April 29th, 1899.
And he was born in?
I'm assuming Bickelheim, because in those days you didn't go anywhere to a hospital. You were born at home.
And he died when?
February 17th, 1982.
And where?
In Cherry Hill.
And your mother's name? What was her maiden name?
Beitman, Beitman.
And when was she born?
February 24th, 1906.
And where?
I'm assuming where she lived for the same reason, Dilkirchen. And that was in a province called the Pfalz, Pfalz.
And when did she die?
December 3rd, 1982.
And where?
Cherry Hill.
Okay. And did you have any siblings?
No.
Okay. And your grandparents, do you remember their names?
Yeah, my grandmother's name was Rosa, maiden name Joseph. My grandfather was Bernard Beitman. I don't know their dates, birth dates.
And how many kids did they have?
She had 11 pregnancies and 9 children were grown. Yeah.
And the other grandfather, Herman?
Herman, yes. My father's mother died in childbirth. My grandfather remarried a year later because he had 3 children. And her name was also Rosa. We had a lot of Rosas. Rosa Reinman. And what was the other question?
And when did he die?
He died in 1945 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I'm not quite sure of the date.
And did you have cousins, aunts, uncles
Lots.
in the area?
I have not here. I have no cousins here. When we lived in Connecticut, I had 7 uncles who eventually married, and I have 14 first cousins on my mother's side, all of them much younger than me.
And all in the United States?
All in the United States.
Anybody stay in Germany?
My grandfather's sister could not come because her husband was ill, and she survived Theresienstadt. And at the end of the war, we found out because there was a newspaper called the Aufbau, which means reconstruction. And every week they would publish lists of people looking for their families. And one day we saw that Mina Beitman was looking for her family. I still have chills when I think about it.
Did you see her?
Oh, yeah. She lived quite a while. She must have been in her late 70s when she came here. I think she lived well into her 80s. I remember her very well.
So she moved to the United States.
A very feisty lady. That's how she survived, I guess.
Do you know how she survived?
The story I got, when she came, when I was 14, she came to America. And in those days, you didn't want your children subjected to anything that would remotely relate to the Holocaust. I was sent to bed. So the only things I know is what I heard from the family, that she survived because she worked in the kitchen. She ate potato scraps and whatever there was. I don't know anything else about her. I wish I did. It's a lost story.
Was your family religious?
We were Orthodox.
And did you carry that forward?
My family carried it. I'm not Orthodox, but my family carried it forward, yes. My mother's family, by and large, they're conservative. Um, my But in my grandparents, of course, were Orthodox, and we went to an Orthodox synagogue when I lived in Connecticut. Women sat upstairs.
And in Germany, did they go to the synagogue?
There was no synagogue in Gabigheim. We walked to the next town, which was Wallertheim, and there was a synagogue there. Yeah. Actually Googled it, and it's still there, I think.
And do you recall your holidays? What do you recall about Shabbat or holidays?
Well, my mother made challah every Friday, and we had Shabbat, and of course we celebrated the holidays, and my grandparents lived with us. So we were a small family, and then my father's uncle lived in the same town with his two grown daughters. When I was 6, they were 18 and 20. Yeah.
Anything else that you remember about your religious background?
No, I was too young to go to religious school, really. If there even was one, I don't even know if there was one. I don't know how many children. I was the only youngster really in town. So I honestly don't know anything about that.
Were there other Jewish people in your town?
Yeah, my father's uncle and his wife and two daughters, and then the Oppenheimers, who were not related but were good friends, and they moved to California. Everybody left before Kristallnacht.
And were you connected to the Jewish community in Mainz at all?
No. That was a big trip in those days. Like you heard me say before, it was an hour and a half train. You had to change trains to get to Mainz. In reality, it's 20 minutes by car now. But in those days, you didn't no. And they wouldn't have particularly ridden on the holidays anyway. In Connecticut, we walked to synagogue. It was over a mile and a half. We walked back and forth.
And do you know how long your family had been in that area? It has a very long history of Jewish people living.
A long time. Many generations. I really don't know how many, but it's been, I would say, at least 5, 6 generations. Right.
And your family had lived in Gau-Bickelheim mainly for those centuries?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what were your parents like?
Very good parents. I had a great childhood, despite the fact that we were uprooted. I had a very loving family. My grandparents came to America, my grandfather on my father's side. I had a very close, good family relationship. I was very fortunate.
May I ask why you were an only child?
Well, I was born in 1931, and by 33, Hitler came to power. And I never really was able to ask my parents that, because that wasn't what you did in those days. My guess is that they knew they had to emigrate, and it was with one child was easier than with two. There was a story that my mother had a miscarriage. I don't really know that firsthand. It probably is true. It may not have been a miscarriage. I don't really know.
And when was that?
Probably around 34. Yeah.
What did your father do for a living in Germany?
My grandfather and he had a business together, a grain business that they sold to farmers for their cows, horses, chickens. It was we weren't wealthy. We weren't by no means, but we were comfortable. We had a nice house. I think we had a maid. I'm not sure. I don't remember a maid particularly, but we were comfortable, and it was a good business, and they had good relations with the neighbors. It was not a problem.
And do you remember any anti-Semitism at that time?
Well, I only remember that they had to take me out of school, that the principal came to my father and said, that was at the beginning of the school year in 1937, that they had to take me out of school. He couldn't protect me if something were to happen, because by then there was anti-Semitism. Not so much with our immediate neighbors, but people shied away. And years later, if you want me to mention that, when we went back 12 years ago, a lady showed up, Elizabeth, who told me, she's 2 years older than me, told me that she used to play in my dollhouse. No idea. But she was very adamant, and she was told she couldn't come anymore because we were Jewish. So, but it's, different times.
And just, it's also the area has vineyards. Was there a connection there with your dad?
No, he just had it. We made our own wine. A lot of people did in the area. Some people actually did it commercially. When we went back 12 years ago, we actually visited a vineyard, not the vineyard. We visited the people that had a vineyard, and they gave us wine to take home, and they had a very nice setup. The town has changed. They now have weekend people coming out who, I don't know where they stay because there certainly isn't a hotel there, but they come out maybe for the day, and they go to the vineyards and they have local wine. So it's to that extent, I think it's changed. I don't know that personally.
Did your family?
But I will tell you one thing: the son runs, and son and the grandson run it. The father's still alive. He was older than I was. He didn't. We lived next door to this vineyard, this place. He had no idea. He didn't remember us at all. Had no idea of anything. That bothered me. That really bothered me. It's easier to accept that we knew terrible things were going on. Yeah.
And who is he?
He was the owner, the original person with the vineyards. The son and the grandson were now running it. Very nice, very, very hospitable, very nice people. It was very uplifting until he said he never heard of us before. It was a very uplifting experience.
And did your father have grapevines?
Yeah, but personal use. Yeah, we had. Mm-hmm.
And did your parents have friends in town?
Well, there weren't. I'm sure they were friends with the people that bought our house, for sure. He was friends with Daniel Beck. I don't really know offhand any other people, but I'm sure everything was very friendly. My family had been there forever.
So everybody knew you?
Everybody knew everybody. I mean, when you have 1,600 people, it's like a small ship.
And most of them were non-Jewish?
Yeah, except the 3 families. Yes, they were non-Jewish.
And you were accepted?
Yeah, wasn't it? Not that I remember. Not that my father ever mentioned.
And what was your home like? You said it was comfortable.
We had a 2-story house, and my grandmother, my second grandmother, had a heart problem. She was a very heavy woman. She had a heart problem, and so she slept on the first floor, and we put in a bathroom inside for her so she could, upstairs we had the bathtub. Downstairs we had the commode and the sink. And that was, I can tell you something very funny that happened when we went back. The first time we went back, my husband and I, with our children. This was when Michael and my daughter Ruth were young. And I was very determined not to be very pleasant. These people were not my people, and I was not going to, in fact, I was going to not even speak German. My husband spoke fluent German. It turned out to be a little bit different. People had taken off from work because they wanted to see the Berger granddaughter. It turned out to be a different kind of experience. And we went to Mrs. Fraunhofer, the lady, Daniel Beck's daughter, welcomed us very much. My father wrote to her. She welcomed us. We should come and visit and see the house and see the orchard. We had pear trees and apple trees. And so when we were there for a while, she remembered we were kosher, which was really unheard of. So I said I needed to use the restroom, and she said, she'll show me. And I said, well, you don't have to show me. I know where it is. It's under the stairs. Well, it turned out it wasn't under the stairs anymore. They had made a linen closet, and they had moved it outside. So if you don't think this is funny, we laughed about that. I can't tell you how long we laughed about that. But, it's their house. The house was well taken care of. The vineyard, the grounds were well taken care of. The garden, everything was really, they were really very, she was really very, very nice. And then we visited neighbors. She insisted we come and visit, and we had to have wine in her good living room. And there was a picture of a soldier on the wall, a German soldier. And she saw me look at it. And she said, he died on the Russian front. And we were in Vietnam at the time. And that really changed things for me. All I could think of was our guys didn't want to be dying in Vietnam either. He didn't want to be dying. He wasn't a concentration camp guard. He didn't want to be dying in Russia in the mud. It made a difference for me. It changed my attitude somewhat. Not completely, but it changed my attitude somewhat.
And what else about your home? How many bedrooms, or what did it look
I think
like?
we had, I have a picture of it. It's a two-story, it was 2 stories. The bottom floor had a kitchen and a living room, which nobody sat in because that was the good room that nobody, the Queen of England might have been able to sit in there. We had a dining room, and then there was a bedroom that my grandmother had used, and she died in Germany, of a heart attack. And then there was the bathroom at one time, and that was downstairs. And upstairs there was a room that had a bathtub, and bedrooms. As far as I remember, 3 bedrooms.
Do you remember anything about the decor, or did you have a fireplace? Or...
Fireplace, I don't remember. I'm sure we did, because the central heating probably wasn't the story then. The kitchen had a wood-burning stove, so that was okay. I'm sure there must have been a fireplace. I don't remember.
And do you remember what your mother used to cook for you?
Oh, she was a good cook. She made all kinds of soups. She made challah on Fridays. Of course, chicken on night, chicken soup. What else do you have on Friday night? She was a good baker. In her younger years, she was really a good baker. She had gone to a bakery school, actually, and she really was. Later years, not so much. Everything was, if we were coming on Saturday, it was cooked on Friday, that kind of thing. But that happens, I know now from getting older myself. You want to be ready for, and I understand that. I didn't understand it then, but I understand it now.
Where would the bakery school have been?
Oh, that was in one of the bigger towns before she was married. I don't really remember. Bad Kreuznach sounds familiar to me, but I honestly couldn't tell you.
And did you have any pets?
No.
Did you have a babysitter?
Not really. My uncle, one of my uncles, my mother's brother, one of her younger brothers, came in the summer and spent the summer with us because he didn't have a bed of his own at home because there were so many children. And at our house, he had a room of his own, but he had to take care of me. And he used to tell me all the time what a lousy kid I was, how bad I was.
In what way?
Well, I used to torment him. I would put my feet on the ground when he was trying to push the stroller, so he couldn't push the stroller. And I was not the easiest child, I guess. I would say I was probably a little spoiled because my grandparents lived with us. I was the only grandchild they had.
Do you remember any of the toys or hobbies that you had?
No. I didn't even remember the dollhouse. I don't remember.
And the street where you lived, do you remember what that was like?
Yeah, Bahnhofstrasse, meaning the railroad street. That's where the train stopped, at the corner of the Bahnhofstrasse.
How close was your house?
We were to the railroad, I think about 3-4 houses. I'm not sure.
And do you remember the trains coming and going?
I don't remember any of that.
Do you remember what the street looked like, or the houses?
They looked like our house, pretty much. They were all that same period. Don't forget that we're talking early 1900s or 1930s, and the house had probably was there when my grandfather and grandmother were raising children. So it's been there since at least since the middle to early 1800s. So
And how long did it take for you to walk to the synagogue?
I think I remember hearing an hour. Yeah.
And do you remember any, let's see, is there anything else you remember about growing up then?
No, I had a pretty, I don't remember anything terrible in Germany, really, because I was very protected. And once I didn't go to school anymore, my mother read to me at home. We were a very close family. It was my two grandparents. Well, my grandmother had died already. My grandfather and my father, mother, and me. And everything was focused, by 1935, everything was focused on leaving.
Did you miss going to school?
I went till I went for a half a year. And then when I was 5, I went to school, and then 5.5, they had to take me out.
And you didn't think anything of it?
I don't remember thinking anything. You know, we're talking about a time when communication wasn't what it is today. There was no internet, no newspapers once a week, no television. So whatever you were told, that's the way it was.
Were your parents up on the news? Were they into?
Oh yeah, my father was.
politics
My
or-
father was very, in his own way, very political. Not so much in the community, but he was. He listened to the radio and read the newspapers, and in the house I'm sure discussed what he needed to discuss. Not outward. You had to be very careful after 33.
And how did they know they needed to be careful?
Well, when you lost your citizenship in 35, you knew you weren't a citizen anymore. You had no rights.
Can you tell us more about that?
Well, 1935 was when the Nazi Party in Nuremberg had a rally, and they took the citizenship away from Jews. Picture that in America. If you didn't have your passport, you have no rights. You're a non-existent person in a non-existent country.
When did your parents know it was time to leave?
When my father had a cousin who went to America in the late 20s, and Nettie Lowenstein, she married Mr. Lowenstein, who was a widower, fairly well-to-do widower, because he's the one who gave us our affidavits. She came to Europe in the mid-30s with Ben to introduce her family. And my father, the story was, my father said to her, "We have to leave. You need to send affidavits for us." Because there was a quota in America. I think it was 250,000. And if you weren't on the list and got a visa number, you couldn't leave. You could get an affidavit, but you couldn't leave because you didn't have a visa number. So she did. She sponsored us. But it took a few years because we didn't leave till February 38. So it took a few years. But they sponsored us and met us at the ship in America.
Do you know what your parents, did they ever talk about the situation while they were waiting for the visas?
Not in my hearing. I was very protected, as were most children probably in those years. I really knew even when I was living in Connecticut, I knew very little about it until I started to go to the movies and see the newsreel. And then they would listen to the radio after I went to bed. I really, not to my credit, but I didn't know anything about anything.
When did you first find out?
I must have been around 11 or 12. What was going on in Europe, yeah. Because by then the newsreels were reporting there was bombings going on and there's all kinds of reporting going on. But my parents, I was very sheltered.
How did you feel about it when you finally heard about it?
Was I resentful? No. It was just that's the way life was. You accepted what your parents were saying and what they were doing. And while I was not a great kid for my uncle, I was not a terribly rebellious, kid, really. My parents both worked. I was a latchkey kid. It was okay.
Did your parents have education?
My father went to higher education. My mother only went to gymnasium, which is high school.
And what kind of education did your dad have?
I don't really know. I imagine some kind of business thing because that's what he was in business.
And where would he have gone to school, do you think?
I think probably in Worms, WORMS. That was a little bit larger town. I don't know if it's bigger than mine's, but they had a college there.
And do you know how your cousins arranged those visas? Do you know anything more about that? What they had to go through? Or?
My uncles came separate. They were not married. My mother and my aunt were the only ones married in Germany. My cousin, my aunt, they had a 1-year-old when they came here. They came on with different people sponsored them. My uncles, most of them came separately, or two of them together, and unknown people sponsored some of them. And they came separately. And then my grandfather was interred in Dachau, and they were able to leave because they had affidavits and visas. My grandfather was taken from Dachau to Bremen to the boat.
How did he arrange that?
Well, it was arranged. I mean, before 1939, before the war started in Europe, Hitler was happy to let people go because you could confiscate all their belongings. We brought our furniture and things with us, but that was early in 38. He was only too happy to let you go, but they couldn't go to Palestine because there was a mandate there. No Jews. None of the other countries. England took children. There was a children's transport my cousin was on. There was really nowhere to go because if you went from Germany to France, that was overrun. Then you went to Belgium, that was overrun. There means nowhere to go. Lisbon was probably one of the only places that was sort of neutral at that time. And Scandinavia was neutral, but you couldn't get there. You needed a passport.
You said all of your belongings, you could send, you sent those, everything?
It's like a 40-foot container today, we'd call it that. It was called a lift. It's really a 40-foot container. And we brought all our furniture with us. Yeah.
And where did you find the ship? And how many of you went to the ship?
Just 3 of us.
And where was that?
Bremerhaven.
And the destination was?
New York.
And the date?
February 17th, 1938.
And do you remember anything about the trip, the ship?
Yeah, I had a great time. They had a nursery and they had a hobby horse. I remember that. I remember sitting on the hobby horse and rocking along and looking out the porthole window. I had a wonderful time. I slept in the upper bunk. They couldn't find the ladder, so my father had to put me there. My parents, on the other hand, wasn't so great. My mother was seasick, and my father was probably very apprehensive about what was going to happen, how was he going to support us, what was going to happen when he got here. He spoke minimal English. He understood minimal English, but not enough really. He understood more probably than he spoke at all. But it was a whole. You went to. It's like going to the moon.
Did any of their friends join you on the ship, or not on that trip?
We were all by. Everybody left at a different time. We went on an American ship, the Manhattan.
You remember the name. Mm-hmm. And was anyone there to greet you?
Yeah, the Lowensteins. Nettie was my father's first cousin, and Ben was her husband. Yeah.
What was that like arriving there?
I don't, it was all very, there were a lot of people getting off the ship. I don't really remember anything specific.
So you remember?
It was not Ellis Island, it was Manhattan.
So you remember a lot of people?
Yeah. But I had a wonderful time. I thought it was for me, it was an adventure. What did I know?
And was there anything else about the boat you remember?
No, I remember eating an orange, which I'd never seen before in my life. And I remember the bunk. It was really great, like being in the upper bunk there. And my mother, my poor mother being not well. And because it was wintertime on the Atlantic.
Were a lot of people sick?
I imagine so. I don't even remember the dining room particularly. I must have been there, but I don't really remember that.
Do you remember looking out to sea?
Oh yeah, on my rocking horse.
Do you remember the Statue of Liberty?
Yeah, I remember that. We were on deck. Yeah, very, very powerful moment.
What was that like?
For me, it was just, isn't that a pretty statue? But for everybody on the ship, it was a very powerful moment. They were safe.
How did you know that as a child?
Well, people were crying and carrying on. I mean, it was, isn't that a pretty statue? Because I didn't know any of the history of the poem or anything like that. I just knew it was a symbol. The Statue of Liberty is a symbol.
And what happened once your cousins picked you up?
Well, we went. I don't know how exactly the timeline, but we had friends who had a cow farm in Paterson, New York. They were friends from Germany. They came here in 1936 or 7, and they invited us to stay with them. So we lived with them for 6 months. They had children. One family had a son my age, and the other family had older children. And we stayed 6 months with them. And they had a sister who lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut. They were kosher butchers. And my parents were not cow farmers. And so we got to Bridgeport, Connecticut. And that's where we lived until 1949.
Until they left, what was your dad? Was your dad helping out or
on the farm? Yeah, sure. Yeah. But that was never his thing.
And then, so you went to Bridgeport from there?
Mm-hmm.
And what was that like?
Well, I got to go to school. I met other children. I ended up in Hebrew school. My parents went to work. My father got a job. It was a factory that manufactured Christmas lights, which was a good job until the war came and they had to close down because they couldn't get the materials anymore. So my father went to work for Stanley Works, which was in defense. And my mother at that time, when the war started in 1941, I was 10 years old. My mother got a job also in defense at Casco, and I had a key. I was a latchkey. But I had a lot of responsibility. It wasn't just that I could do what I wanted. It was a different time.
They trusted you with the key.
Yeah, well, I had it around my neck. And, you didn't have to worry so much about somebody knocking your kid down and taking the key. You didn't have to worry so much about it. It was wartime. People were really involved in patriotism. It was a whole different world.
And can you tell me a little bit more about Costco and Stanley Works?
Well, Stanley Works I think they're still in business. They make hardware. They make screwdrivers and wrenches and things I think they're still in business. I'm not sure. Casco was, I don't know what happened to them after the war. Initially they made heating pads and things of that sort, but not during the war. I don't know what they made during the war, really. But my mother worked there. My father was shift work. Well, 2 weeks daytime, 2 weeks nighttime. Because they worked 24 hours a day.
And so both of your parents were working for
defense.
How many years or?
Well, till the war ended.
And then?
My mother stopped working because my grandfather was sick. And so she helped nurse my grandfather. My father, the place he worked for, they had a son that came back from the war. And he took the job my father had. My father was manager of the little plant. So there was no... And in those days, when you were in your mid-50s or late 50s, people didn't really want to hire you. And my two aunt and uncles were living in Vineland, and my parents really wanted to live in a small place, and they bought a farm.
And what state
that was in 1949.
What state?
New Jersey, Vineland.
So you moved from Bridgeport to Vineland.
I finished school in Bridgeport, and my parents moved to Vineland in the middle of the year, and I stayed with my grandmother until I finished school.
And did you go to synagogue in Bridgeport and in Vineland?
Oh, sure.
And you celebrated all the holidays as usual? Did you ever encounter any anti-Semitism in those areas? Well,
the only time I had anti-Semitism was in 7th grade. And to this day, I remember his name, Dennis Nola. Would you believe that? I mean, I've forgotten millions of things. This is I remember. He sat behind me, and he would taunt me and say, "Dirty Jew." And one day I turned around and slapped him. And guess who got sent to the principal? Well, she saw me doing it. She didn't see him doing anything. My mother had to come up to school, But other than that, I really didn't have much. Most of my friends were Jewish. My best friend was not. My best friend was Italian. Mary Perry. But most of my friends were Jewish, and I went to Hebrew school. Most of my friends were from Hebrew school.
And that's in Bridgeport?
Bridgeport, yeah.
And then how about Vineland?
Well, Vineland, I worked for the rabbi at the synagogue, actually, Beth Israel Synagogue. I worked there. I was his secretary for the whole time I was there. And then when I got married, I moved to Philadelphia.
And how old were you when you started working for him?
Well, 18.
And I've been meaning to ask you, how was it to be a German speaker and then have to speak English all of a sudden?
Well, it didn't take long for me to learn English. First of all, there were no English as a second language classes at all. But They put me in first grade, which I really should have been in second grade. And eventually I skipped a grade because I had already gone to school in Germany. But I would say within a year I was speaking English. And my parents went to night school. And we spoke English at home.
At home.
That's not to say they didn't speak German to my grandmother or to each other sometimes, but we spoke English at home. They wanted to be Americans.
And were those the only two languages in your family that was spoken? And were the foods different in America? Did you find it?
Well, my mother cooked the same way she cooked in Germany. We never went out to eat, and people didn't go out to restaurants in those days. These people in our economic bracket, my mother cooked the same way she cooked in Europe.
And what was your house? What was your house like in Bridgeport? And
well, we had an apartment when we first moved in, and we had hot and cold running mice. That I remember. No matter what you plugged up, they found another place to come in. And eventually, my parents and my uncle bought a house together, and we lived on the second floor. It was 3 stories. They lived on the first floor. We lived on the second and the third floor. My other uncle lived. So we were like in the old country, family living together. You know, it seemed to have worked okay. Everybody was still speaking.
And that was Bridgeport?
That was in Bridgeport. Yeah.
So everybody was getting along?
Oh yeah.
And then in Vineland, where did you live?
Well, we bought a farm.
Tell me more about that.
Well, bought a chicken farm that had, I think, 3 chicken houses. I'm not sure. It was a cottage, a small cottage, everything on 1 floor, and it was nice. You know, it was a nice little house. And we had a dog. We had Rusty, which was a rat terrier, and he went in the chicken coops and made sure things were okay. And then my uncle, who lived in Vineland, he had he bred German Shepherds. And for my birthday one year, he gave me a little German Shepherd, which I left there when I got married. I couldn't take him to Philadelphia to an apartment. So Wolfie stayed with my father. Yeah.
And how did you meet your husband? What's the story there?
On a bus. He thought I was this nice Italian. I used to have dark hair. He thought I was this nice Italian girl. Until one day he met me at the Jewish youth group. Yeah, that's how I met him.
Is there more to that story?
Not really. You know, he and my husband graduated Temple, and he worked in Vineland at one of the canneries. He was an accountant. And he used to go back on the weekends to his friends in Philly. And my grandmother used to say, "It's not going to work out. Not going to work out. He's not here on the weekends." Not that I was sitting home pining for him. And then one day he wasn't going to Philly anymore. So my grandmother said it looked serious.
And what was his name and where was he born?
Felix Victor Bass, and he was born in Vienna, Austria, on November 4th, 1927.
And was he a survivor, or what was his story about?
Well, he has a more interesting story than I do, because we got on a ship and came to America. My father-in-law was told by my father-in-law worked for a publishing firm. He was an editor, and he was told by a colleague, the Anschluss. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It was in March 39, 38. He was told that they better think about leaving. They were fairly affluent, in a sense. They lived in the best district in town. My mother-in-law had help in the house, so they left more or less on the sly. They took a train to the border, and a friend of my father-in-law's it was in Liechtenstein, which is adjacent, picked them up, and they lived there for 6 months. And they went to Switzerland for 6 months. They went to France. Then they ended up in England during the Blitz. Now, meanwhile, they had tickets to get to Genoa, to get on a ship from Italy. The problem was you couldn't get to Genoa because you couldn't get a transit visa. You needed a transit visa to go to Italy from Austria. So eventually they got to Lisbon and were able to come here. He was 12 when he came here.
He was 12 when he
It was in 1941.
Can we take a pause
Sure.
right now?
Sure.
All right, we're pausing the camera. Okay, now we're back from a pause. And what would you like to tell us about your husband's story?
Well, my husband never spoke much about anything at all. We never really knew uh, anything. And when my youngest grandson was in Hebrew school, they went to Hebrew day school. They had to interview a grandparent. Well, nobody needed to interview me. Everybody knew my story backwards and forwards because I'm not a very closed up person. He interviewed my husband, and then we found out that the things I was telling you about. And what I missed was that my father-in-law was in the park when his colleague told him that they better get on this, get out. But that was the first time we actually knew anything about any background. My in-laws never talked about it at all. My parents, if I would ask a direct question, I would get an answer, but I never really asked a lot of questions. But my in-laws never talked about it really, and they were a lot more upset isn't the right word by what happened, because they had had a very illustrious life as opposed to my parents, who had a more simple life. And I'm not knocking that. I think it's, it was great, but it was much more difficult for them, which I didn't realize until much later, was much more difficult for them to adjust to, and they never really adjusted.
What else do you know about them and their lives over there?
Well, they were secular Jews in Vienna. My husband had to go to Hebrew school because the state mandates that you have to go somewhere. Religion is supported by the state in Europe. At least it was. I'm not sure what's happening now. So in other words, a synagogue and a church, they got funds from the state. So that you had to go show, when you came to public school, you had to show that you had gone to catechism, or you had gone to Hebrew school, or you had gone somewhere. You had to bring in a card and show. So he did go to Hebrew school in because he had to. But I don't know that much else, really.
And how old was he?
He was 12 when he came here.
Did
but they traveled around for a year and a half, 2 years in Europe. 6 months here, 6 months there.
Did he ever say anything more about his lifestyle in Vienna?
No, but I knew that they had a good lifestyle.
Which neighborhood they lived in?
They lived in the first district, which is the preempted district. It's have you ever been to Vienna? Oh, it's they lived in the first district, yeah. And it was a good life. I mean, he up until things changed, but things were changing before the Anschluss. That was just the end. But it had been coming for years before that. Probably since 1935.
And were they allowed to take anything?
Very little. My mother-in-law had a few things. There was a vase, and there were a few things. Well, the interesting thing was she had a ring. When my mother-in-law died, my husband was an only child, so my father-in-law gave us all her things. And there was a ring with a tiny little, diamond in it. And I threw it in a drawer, somewhere. And years later, actually, I think I offered it to Michael, if he wanted to have it reset. I thought it was a tiny little. Turns out, I took it to the jeweler, and it turns out it's a 3-carat diamond. My mother, that was what they couldn't take any money. So, but nobody said, I could have given it to the cleaning help, what did I know? But it was set so that only the tip of the diamond was set, that you couldn't see the rest. But I understand that's not unusual. That was done by a lot of people. But because you couldn't take any money. You were very restrictive with money. We could bring all our household belongings, which we did, but we couldn't bring, which brings me to a story. We had a couch made. I have a picture of it I can show you later. And the arm of the couch was way up like this. And if you took the back off, you could pull out the drawer from the front. It had a deep drawer. So we brought Leica cameras and embroidered tablecloths with us, because you couldn't. Now, the man who made those made them for a lot of people. He eventually got killed because somebody turned him in. But he made them for a lot of people. It was a very awkward looking couch because you had the one side down and the other side was like this. But we had that for years when I was living in Vineland. Yet we had it for years. About my cousin sent me a picture because when I used to speak to schools, I would show them the picture and tell them the story. But we were able to sell the Leica was a big. I mean, we didn't have all these, iPhones and stuff. Leica was, it still is. It's the number one camera. So we were able to sell those, and so we had some money because you couldn't bring. I think you could bring something like 50 marks or something with you, which was nothing, really. Yeah. But people did for each other. The people who had come earlier helped the people that were coming. We were lifelong friends with the Mendels, the people we stayed with in Patterson. Every time we go to Connecticut, we'd go visit. It was just, they weren't relatives. It was just that kind of feeling.
And who were they?
They were the people, the conform.
And that was Patterson, New Jersey?
New York.
New York. And so you got married. Did you ever work for any organizations?
I was in Hadassah.
And what years?
Oh, I don't know.
Approximately.
Probably 20, 30 years. So 30 years ago would have been what?
And where was that?
In Cherry Hill. Yeah.
And you had children?
Yeah, I have Michael, my youngest, and I have my daughter, Ruth, who's 2 years older.
And what are their birthdays?
Ruth is May 17th, 1956.
And her full name is?
Ruth Lynn Moriarty.
And Michael's birthday?
Is May 29th, 1958.
And his full name?
Michael Stephen.
And you were secretary to a rabbi when?
And not from 49 to 51.
In
Vineland.
Where was that, Vineland?
Beth Israel Synagogue.
And did you reunite with any family members after the war? Was there anybody left over?
Well, just the aunt that came over from Theresienstadt.
Yeah. And as you have become a mature woman, when you got older, did you have another view of the Holocaust that you started to develop?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
I mean,
what other view could I have of the Holocaust?
You were young when you first heard about it. You were, 11 or so, and then when you got a little bit older,
the Holocaust. To go back, in '38 when we came here, there was really there were no death camps. That did not come in until Wannsee, which was in 1942. So by 1942, I was 11 years old. I didn't particularly know about death camps at that point, but I knew about Jews being persecuted in concentration camps. I don't know how to answer that. My view of the Holocaust, it hasn't changed much. It shows man's humanity to man. Nothing's changed in the world,
And so you have told your story to others. You want to tell us about that?
Well, after Helen convinced me I had a story to tell, when I was able to, I used to go to schools, talk to the kids, bring my pictures with me, show it to them. They were very interested in the sofa. Also the affidavit. I have the affidavit that was ours, and I have passports. And they were very interested in seeing all that. Yeah.
And what's the name of that program that you spoke for?
Well, it's through the Holocaust Museum here, through the Rob Goodman Holocaust Museum. Helen Kirschbaum runs it.
And is this related to the Names Not Numbers?
No.
And
that's a national thing.
And how did you get involved in that?
Well, Kelman Academy, the Jewish day school here, I guess the Solomon Schechter School, they contacted me. I knew it was in existence because I have friends who were interviewed 5 years ago. They contacted me and asked if I would be a participant. Yeah.
And what did you do?
It was the kids ran the show. they had a professional photographer helping them, of course. And I had, like you did, you interviewed me at a time. I had one of the teachers interview me, and the kids made up questions to ask. And I was had to answer the. It was all. What they did was they took 4 people and they edited down to an hour program for Yom HaShoah. So mine was wasn't that much in there because the other people unfortunately had a much worse life than I did. In fact, I found out one of my friends actually lived in Uzbekistan, which I had no idea all these years. But anyway, it's a very good program. It's run by somebody named Rosenberg, I think, and they go around, I guess, to different places and do it. It's in conjunction with the Jewish Day School in Philadelphia, Kibbutz Academy, or Barak Academy, it's called now. The kids actually do all the interviewing. It's a wonderful experience for them because they learn how to use the photography. They learn how to do all kinds of things. It was a very good experience for them and for me.
Was it primarily for Jewish kids or mixed?
Well, the day school is Jewish kids. It's all Jewish kids. I shouldn't say all. I would say, maybe they have someone there who's not, but it's all the Jewish day schools. Yeah.
And is there anything else you want to tell us about the work you have done in telling your story? Any perceptions or memories about it, or that come to you about the work you've done?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of it.
So how do you feel about the recent rise in anti-Semitism? What are your views about that?
I think anti-Semitism has always been. It's never going away, and it's always been there. What's happened in recent years, I'm not even talking about October 7th, the conflict. What's happened in recent years is that it's been more acceptable than it was before. And I think bigotry in general has been more acceptable. Without getting political, that's my story. And I don't see it getting that much better soon.
Is there any advice you would give us or anything you would recommend to the world?
Get along with each other. What's the big deal about, everybody's so territorial, everybody's so hateful. Get along with each other. I mean, it's like your family. You have to get along with your family. You don't have to love them, everything they do, but you get along with each other. Stop killing each other off for reasons that really are crazy. What difference does it make what church you go to, or what synagogue, or what mosque you go to? If you're a good person, But I don't see things getting a lot better soon, really. I wish I did, but I don't. Not in my lifetime, let's put it that way.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we close the interview?
I think we've pretty much covered everything, I think. I can't think of anything. What is?
Let's take a pause. We're back from our pause, and would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Michael Bass. I'm Inge Bass's son.
And please tell us what you'd like to say about your mother or your family or any of your experience.
Well, we've always been a very close family. There's just 4 of us, my sister, myself, my father, and I. And unfortunately, my father passed 15 years ago, but we have still remained very close to my mother. Fortunately, I live just 10 minutes away, so it's nice to be able to come back and forth. Mom and I go to dinner about once a week or so, and she really enjoys it, so do I. But I have to make sure the night before that I'm very in tune with current events, politics, the stock market, because she'll bury me in the conversation otherwise, and I'll look foolish. But it's a very nice relationship, and my sister and I too. We get along very well. We all get along well. It's always been a close family. And sometimes I think part of that is because of the history. I know a lot of survivor families and second generation like me that I'm friendly with. And it seems like those families are a little bit closer because of the history of the family. They just want to keep everybody nearby.
You want to talk about what you do in the field of the Holocaust?
I've been involved with the Rob Goodwin Holocaust Education Center for about 15 years. 2 years ago, I undertook the position of the chairperson of the steering committee, which basically means you're doing the same thing but more. So we plan events, fundraisers, local community events like for Yom HaShoah. We have a fundraiser in the fall called the March of Remembrance, where it draws about 400 or 500 people. We have a little march and we have a speaker afterwards. And we just want to keep the community involved in events like this. And they're very well attended. I mean, people have a soft spot for that in this community because there's a lot of Jewish families. And the vast majority of them have a similar history of my mother as a refugee or family having gone through the camps. They all have a connection to it. So they're very well attended and very educational. We see films, speakers, things like that.
Would you say how did your mother influence you in these matters?
In getting involved? It was the other way around. I was involved first. And she didn't want any part of it for a long time because she felt outside of the rest of the group because she didn't go through what they went through. And Helen Kirschbaum, who was an incredible director of this organization and has been for, I think, about 20 years, she kept in touch with my mother and gradually brought her into the fold. My mother went kicking and screaming at first, which she'll admit. And I kind of helped it along a little bit to the extent that I didn't want to get in trouble with my mother for pushing her in, which she thought I was for a while. But in the end, she really enjoys being part of it. She's in the local, what's it called, the Claims Conference.
Well, I'm on the Holocaust Advisory Committee, which is due to some of it's from the Claims Conference, which they get a lot of money from every year, funding for Germany.
And you sit on that board, right?
I'm on the board, yeah, and we do it by Zoom. We've been doing it by Zoom ever since COVID, and we still do it by Zoom. It's a very active JCC. Every Friday we have a Holocaust meeting from any survivors, Russian, Ukrainian, Polish, German, and there's a program, and it's very well attended, and we all had not seen each other in person until about a year ago. And there was an in-person Cafe Europa, and we all looked at each other. Diana, it's you. Is it? Because we hadn't ever seen each other. But the JCC here does an outstanding job, seriously, of keeping the survivors not just happy, but involved.
Engaged, right.
Together. They do a tremendous job.
And she got involved in speaking, like you said, speaking to the class.
I don't do it anymore now.
You did it for a few years. And I think you enjoyed that with the kids.
I did like it.
She really enjoys getting with the kids.
I'm a people person.
Letting them ask the questions and explaining what happened. She's involved as much as she can be.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I'm glad you gave my mother this opportunity. Like I said, every time she talks, I learn something too, even though we've talked forever about this type of thing. No, I just like to keep the history alive so that it doesn't get buried under the rug someday. I think that's very important. I think what you're doing really enhances that.
And the other thing is our Holocaust director, she's very big on second or third generation because we only have about 125 Holocaust survivors in our community now. And she's very big on involving the second and third generation. Wouldn't you say it, Michael?
The second gen is very active. That's my group.
Because they're the ones that are going to have to present.
She brought in the kids of the second gen, the third gen, and even some of the fourth gen who are very little. But they come along with the parents sometimes because she just wants to keep all the generations going. Once the story stops with the generation, if you don't do this, it just gets lost.
Which is why you're doing this.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing your life stories.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Inge, what are we looking at here?
You're looking at the affidavit that was sent to my father from Ben and Eddie Lowenstein for us to be able to emigrate to America. And in addition to that, you needed a visa, but the affidavit means that for 5 years, they will support you so that you do not become a burden to the state. So when you issue an affidavit, that's what comes with it.
Thank you. Inge, what are we looking at here?
You're looking at my naturalization for citizenship after 5 years. We came here in 1938, and in 1943, I could apply for citizenship. My parents insisted I get my own. I could have become a citizen under my father's name, but my parents wanted me to have my own document, which of course makes a lot of sense. That's my citizenship papers, officially, U.S. government.
Thank you. Inge, what are we looking at now?
That's my father's passport that we needed to leave Germany to emigrate to the United States. It's my father at a much younger age, of course. He was 38 years old there. And the writing on the right side is all in German, and on the left it says Deutsches Reich, it means it's Germany, and Reiche Pass is a passport.
Thank you. Inge, what is this?
This is my mother's passport, and on the right-hand side at the bottom, you'll see it says INGE. That's me. I was on my mother's passport to come to America.
Thank you. I want to see. Inge, what are we looking at here?
That is me going to my first grade class with my little knapsack, and I was about 5 years old there.
Thank you. Inge, who are we looking at here?
This is my grandfather, Berger, and my real grandmother who died in childbirth, Rosa Mayer. This a long time ago, they were probably very young there.
Thank you. Inge, who are we looking at here?
You're looking at my parents. This is their engagement picture. My mother would have been 24 when she got engaged, and my father was 7 years older, 31. That's their engagement picture.
Thank you. Inge, what is this?
Well, this is the couch I was talking about in the interview, where the one on the left-hand side is, you'll see it's a big hump. And if you took the back of the couch off and unscrewed it, you could pull out the drawer. And in that drawer, you could bring whatever you wanted to bring. We happened to bring Leicas and tablecloths. But you could bring anything you wanted. They screwed it back up again. Of course, in those days, they didn't have radar. You couldn't do what you do at the airports now, so nobody knew it was in there. But the man eventually was killed because somebody turned him in.
And who's the person?
That's my cousin Rhoda.
Thank you. What are we looking at here?
The house on the left, the black and white, is the house I was born in where I lived. And on the right, it's in color. The lady in the picture is the daughter of the man who bought the house from us when we left in 1938, and the guy with her is my son-in-law John. They went back with the girls some years before Michael and Alan and I went back. The girls also wanted to see where their grandmother came from, and that's what that is. Yeah, that's the garden behind them, the side of the house with the garden.
Thank you. And what is this?
It's the town I was born in, Gabickelheim, and it sits on the roadway going into town.
Thank you. And what are we looking at here?
The one on the left is my father's stepmother. She died in the 30s. And the one on the right is all the family that have been buried there. The first one, the half one, is my father's brother Otto, who died of scarlet fever at the age of 11, I think. And the reason it's that way is because it was cut down in life. So it's a half his tombstone.
And what town is this in?
Gabickelheim.
Thank you. And this concludes our interview.